When Daggerheart was first released, even though it didn't have a default definitive setting of its own, its aesthetic was definitely one of high kitchen sink fantasy. That was the visual assumption, at least. And if you look at the publishing company, Darrington Press, it's owned by the biggest actual play concern of all time, Critical Role, which itself has made its fortune showcasing D&D 5e, a high heroic fantasy RPG. But Bureau of Chronological Affairs, or BCA, really challenges that assumption in a really interesting way. It takes the core Daggerheart rules and strips the fantasy skin off the bones. BCA is a tabletop RPG by Jack Panic of Dungeon Club. It's a game that is largely inspired by the show Loki, which sees characters sort of gang pressed into the service of a multiverse management agency and uses the rules framework of Daggerheart. And that's largely what I wanted to show you in this video. In BCA, you don't play in a derivative fantasy realm. You wake up in an infinite non-Euclidean office space called the Nexus, and you aren't equipped with plate mail and magic items. You get a standard issue windbreaker, an Ultratech ID badge, and a mostly redacted agent handbook. Now, the text cites influences like Loki, Control, and Severance, aiming for a tone that mixes corporate horror with existential dread and, of course, multiversal madness. But the reason I wanted to look into this game was to see if the Daggerheart rules could really be adapted to a setting so far removed from the unstated foundational theme of the original game. I think the creator here does a lot of things that make this a compelling and original standalone game, and there are also some spots that need more time in the oven or could use more polish. I want to uncover all of that stuff with you in this video. As always, links for everything are below. Let's jump in. Okay, it says here complexity 2 out of 4. I don't know how accurate that is. It's all pretty relative. If you're not familiar with how Daggerheart works generally, and all you've ever played is something like 5e, then I'd go so far as to say that this game would be quite a challenge to understand. But who knows? This is a multiverse RPG, so there's actually no limit on the ancestries or class options from the original Daggerheart game. In fact, you could be any kind of creature or class from any setting you want, as long as you can sort of square away the mechanics. If you want to play this game within the framework that I think it was originally intended, though, you're pretty much going to be playing as a human who is specifically an agent. And as an agent, you're given a BCA windbreaker, an ID badge, and a partially redacted agent field guide. Your goal as an agent is to restore the headquarters of the BCA by succeeding at little quests and missions. Those quests and missions range from locating other agents, recovering data, investigating whatever mystery the GM throws at you, and shutting down malignant timelines. If you fail to shut down a timeline, it merges with the main timeline, that's the one we all live in, and a doomsday clock goes up by 1. If that clock reaches 30, you play out an in-game scenario with a big boss and everything. More on that later. You know, there are already some soft death options in Daggerheart. Blaze of Glory is your standard going out with a bang, but there's also Risk It All, where you roll your 2d12 for a chance at miraculously gaining HP or stress points. It's kind of weird that this is even an option. Of course, you're going to at least try to take this roll to save your character. But then there's the avoid death option, where you roll to see if you just wake up unscathed later, except there is a chance that you will lose a hope slot, which is something. But here's the thing. The game wants you to use a new death mechanic called the death loop. With the death loop, when you die, you are reconstituted back at the HQ, called the Nexus, and if your fellow agents can bring your agent ID back to the Nexus, then you are back in business, but this time one level higher. And you may come back as a different species, and memories of your previous life are faint at best. Unfortunately, a new malignant timeline will also appear when this happens, although it is completely up to the GM to work out if and how that new timeline is related to your previous character and their death. Your Nexus headquarters starts off as a black box, basically. Every time you complete a mission or solve any kind of mystery, one new room will be unlocked. Each of these rooms can be unlocked via this map that is on the back of your character sheet, either by player choice along this path or completely by GM's choice. If you've unlocked one of these so-called sites of function, you can revisit them at any time. There's no travel mechanic or anything in the Nexus. So you can think of these rooms as an unlockable menu of boons and bonuses for your party. Almost all of these rooms have one or two quirky employees, a useful resource, and a tribute or cost required by those employees. The first room that you'll always unlock is the server room and terminal. This is where you're basically handed your next mission and can track the status of missions. But all the other rooms have nifty little unique resources. The armory allows you to acquire any standard gear, equipment, or weapons. If you want powerful or special gear, you need to spend an armory token, which is earned by defeating a bad timeline. I think the information, inquisition, and extraction room here is very representative of this game's approach to the storytelling dynamic. If you unlock this room and fill it with 3 prisoners, then the agent in the room gives you a quote, dark boon, one which the group decides on, but which also must have a significant drawback. So in a way, this game would probably be pretty punishing for a group of uninspired or unimaginative players, or tables where everyone's expecting the GM to come up with everything about the world. If you don't have any game design chops, you're going to be hitting little walls like this constantly as a player. And yeah, it looks like there are 20 more sites of function, but you'll need to design them completely yourself. So just to recap, you play as an agent who's being sent to quell potentially harmful timelines, and these can be absolutely anything, anywhere, and the thing required to quell them can also be absolutely anything. And as you quash those timelines, you're rewarded with more and more of your base being unlocked. But as you occasionally fail, lose your way, or die along the way, a doomsday clock will tick its way up to a finale. That's the play loop. The GM is meant to assign a counter of 6 tokens to any given malignant timeline, and that counter will go up and down depending on the progress or failure of the agents. As mentioned earlier, you can play any Daggerheart class that you want in this game, but it really wants you to play as an agent, who for some reason has access to 2 out of 3 of these domains, which I believe are from the original Daggerheart game. They haven't been reskinned or rethemed for BCA, which I thought was a little odd. Although I will say, if you're intimately familiar with Daggerheart, then these domains are just one less thing you have to relearn. Your ID badge is actually super special in this game. It's way more than a badge. If you recall, you can only be resurrected after dying if another agent or someone returns your badge to the Nexus. But the badge will also act as a universal translator and change your appearance to look like the locals in whatever world you've walked into. Well, the disguise doesn't work against enemies that you have to fight, actually. There are 4 subclasses for the agent, the default of which is a desk jockey. These have advantage on rolls when traversing space-time, but limited downtime activities. All of the subclasses also have one super powerful gadget or another. For the desk jockey, it's a watch that can open doors and hack security systems on a successful spellcasting roll. Now, I really don't want to reveal to you the Doomsday Countdown finale, except to say that the agents are all faced with a choice when that Doomsday clock reaches 30. And that choice either leads to a sort of New Game Plus, where they have some upgraded abilities as well as upgraded enemies, or they have to fight a big bad guy. What I thought was kind of odd, but maybe this was intentional, I don't know, is that the whole finale thing is actually included in the player's only handbook, but the core rules of the game, as derived from the Daggerheart SRD, are sort of marked as top secret and provided in a separate PDF for the GM. I would have thought this should have been the other way around. But that being said, this game does do a great job of recapping the rules of Daggerheart. Those rules span 18 pages, and they're fairly dense if you're not used to the game's rules. I'm not going to explain all the rules for Daggerheart in this video, but it's worth mentioning that a large portion of this game's dice resolution is done with 2d12s, called your hope and fear dice. When you're making an action roll, you're rolling these 2 dice, adding them up, along with any other modifiers, and trying to meet or exceed a difficulty number set by the GM for that test. There are 5 possible outcomes. Success with hope, where you exceed the target and your hope die was higher than your fear die, and likewise success with fear, failure with hope, and failure with fear. And if the dice are matching, it's always a critical success. You're constantly managing a pool of meta points called hope, which you can spend to do all kinds of things. Interestingly, the GM also constantly earns and spends points of their own called fear points, but this empowers them to do what I would consider obvious GM things. I don't know, I'm a little skeptical of adversarial GM points like these, but I can see the appeal. They make the game more of a game for the GM. But alright, here's my wish list for BCA, as well as all the things I really like about this game. Domain cards should be more thematic. Yeah, on the one hand, if you're coming in from OG Daggerheart, you will definitely find these domain cards to be really easy to use. But if you're wanting the full Loki multiverse timeline crisis experience, these really need to be reskinned. Timeline generator expanded. The GM has the responsibility of creating the framework for the fiction here, and that includes the timeline or the world that is being entered for each mission. I think the timeline generator could probably be expanded by about 500% here in order to give GMs more to work with. That being said, the game encourages GMs to pull settings from other RPGs as well as books, television, and movies. Anything goes. So if you're comfortable with that notion, you don't really need this generator at all. A GM tracker sheet. The GM is expected to track the Doomsday Clock as well as individual timeline mergers and a few other bits and bobs. It would be nice to have a printable sheet with all those trackers. Some PDF reorganization. I do like the idea of having a player-only version of the game and a GM version, but I think the player version should include the core rules of the game, while the GM version should have the stuff about the finale. Shows that Daggerheart is not just for fantasy. This is the hat trick that Jack Panic pulled off here, essentially. He showed that Daggerheart could be adapted into a completely different storytelling machine than what the original game sort of implies. You may or may not like the show Loki or even watched it, but it's hard to deny that this game doesn't pull off the vibes of that show, and doing it with Daggerheart rules is both impressive and leaves a lot of food for thought on the future of the Daggerheart game. Has some fun rules innovations. I forgot to mention earlier, but the difficulty target for any given challenge is not actually set by the GM. Rather, it's always going to be whatever the current Doomsday Clock is at. So as the clock inches up from 0 to 10 to 20 and all the way up to 30, everything uniformly gets harder and harder. This is a fascinating modification of the rules and creates an entirely built-in tension ramp. It also completely offloads the burden of the GM of coming up with difficulty numbers for enemies and other challenges. The other novel mechanics are really clever too, like having the unlockable Nexus HQ and the Death Loop. Puts a lot of the creative load on players' shoulders. I know there are different tribes of RPG enthusiasts these days, and some are really allergic to players having any of the responsibility of creating the world and the details of a scene. Anything that isn't based on some old version of Dungeons and Dragons is going to be lumped into a pile called story games. But that's fine. As a GM, I happen to enjoy sharing the creative load with players. It creates more buy-in, and frankly, they come up with better stuff than I would at least half the time. I enjoy the imagination and creativity of my players, and this game asks players to flex those muscles pretty frequently. Immaculate visual design. Last but not least, I've been a fan of Jack Panic's visual design and layout for a while now, completely aside from his rules design skills. He has really mastered the art of communicating that nostalgic 70s and 80s retro aesthetic, and I can never get enough of his stuff. And I think he did an excellent job in this game in terms of the visual language. I think BCA really does shatter the assumption that Daggerheart is a system defined solely by heroic fantasy. It's a very confident, stylish hack that trades long swords for windbreakers, and really is proof of how malleable the Daggerheart engine can be. If you're ready to see what Daggerheart can really do, it might be time to grab your agent ID and clock in. Remember to like and subscribe for more RPG reviews and join the channel as a member for exclusive videos and content. Links for everything are below. I'll see you in the next one.